Good evening. This is the 7 o'clock live stream from the VegFest UK online event for November 14th, 15th, 2020. This is the final live stream of the evening, and we've been joined by some fantastic guests today. And this evening, we are joined live from Toronto in Canada. For a really interesting hour from a very good friend of ours from VegFest, who's been to a number of VegFest events before, live at Olympia over the years. It's got some really interesting perspectives on a few things. So without further ado, I would like to welcome Dr. Tushar Mehta. Tushar, hello.
Hey, hello, Tim. Hello, everybody in London, UK, or wherever you're tuning in from.
So yeah, and Tushar, you're in. You were just telling me you're in just northeast Toronto in Canada. So just in Ontario, Canada, coming to us live tonight. So you're about 1 o'clock in the lunchtime, is it? Your time?
It's 2 p.m. here. Yeah, northwest area, a suburb called Brampton. That's where I live. Did a lot of growing up here.
And what we're going to be doing tonight, Dr. Tushar Mehta is going to be talking about 3 or 4 areas in particular, all of which are interesting areas. I'll run through them in a minute. But just before that, just a little bit of background. Apart from the fact that you've been to VegFest to speak on a number of occasions, you are, in fact, a practicing doctor. You're working in A&E, so that's accident and emergency, in hospital in Grantham area in Toronto. And you are basically frontline doctor, really, isn't it? It's frontline work.
Yeah, A&E work, or we call it just emergency medicine over here. It is definitely frontline work, one of the different types of frontline work that so many people are doing. And so we do deal with a lot of COVID and related issues as well. That's constantly.
We're going to come to that. We're going to have a little look at global pandemics. I'll ask you a little bit about what you're seeing too. So I know you're an expert in a number of fields. And one of the things you mentioned, we were chatting actually, and I know this is some people listening with. So this will tickle a few people here. Is when we talk about research, you mentioned how, if you'd only done 5 or 6 hours research on something, that you barely would want to mention it, because for you, like, research is at least minimum of hundreds of hours of really absorbing information. You must have a laugh when you hear these people going, "Oh, do your research," which is watching some hour-long YouTube of spurious origin.
Right. I think when it comes to people's opinions, people base their opinions on very little information. And a lot of times they have a lot of inherent biases. When we talk about environment or any political issues, or in our case, we talk about plant-based diet, veganism, there's whether you're pro-vegan or whether people are not vegan, either way, there's just a lot of things being said which are not necessarily well informed. This year, I, with a small team, started a website called Plant-Based Data. So I hope that people will check it out, plantbaseddata.org. Okay. And there we have spent actually thousands of hours actually over the years compiling the best papers and academic research. And there's so much out there regarding plant-based diet as and health, regarding environmental issues. And this year we created a whole section on zoonoses, and we're starting a new section on economics and policy as well. And it's an evolving project. It's only been around since March, but I hope that people will tune into that. It looks like a lot of stuff when you go in there, but if you start looking at the summaries of key articles and gradually exploring the databases, they're free to you to browse, and there'll be a great resource. You'll soon get used to the lay of the land inside there. It just takes a little bit of time. But we want academics, activists, policymakers, teachers, educators, professors, medical people, everybody to look into this to get information.
So this is plantbaseddata.org. Is this the correct website? Have we spelled
Yes,
it correctly?
yes,
So
that is
that's
it.
your
You
free
got it.
resource for.
Yeah.
I think it is. You're right. I mean, we've noticed this. We noticed this on social media. Is that often people don't read past even the title, and
Yeah.
even selective to the point where they will only read half the subtitle.
Yeah.
A bit like what I mean by this. If you're reading this, you'd only get as far as reading vegan cheese. You just wouldn't see the made in Scotland. Even like you won't see that. You
Yeah.
choose to disregard this, and I think the level of data and information that is really important. That
Well,
is trustworthy source when we come to this.
even having said all those things, at the same time, there are a lot of fantastic people that are, making videos and educational material that are very evidence-based. Here in North America, we have Dr. Michael Greger, who's been a guest at UK Veg Fest as well. Fantastic. And there's people like Mike the Vegan, who makes videos, and others too. And we should always look that when we're getting information from people, are they well referenced? Are they including the references to what they say? And are they good references? So yes, you have to dig a little deeper to see if they're good references, but those are the kind of things that we look out for. And there's lots of people doing good work. And if we want to strengthen the plant-based movement or the vegan movement, then we should hopefully all up our game in, from wherever we're at, to know the information a bit better. And then when we're speaking to others and helping, educate other people, spreading the word, we're doing it from the best possible knowledge, right? And that means to also look at our own biases too, and not overstate things or not understate things.
Just before we go on on that note about bias and about information, just before we go on to, we're going to look at a few subjects: global pandemics, and we're going to look at how animal agriculture has been a leading cause of this. We're going to look at regenerative grazing, which I know is a really subject of yours that you've looked into a lot, about how animal agriculture impacts on the environment. And then also look about some of the basic messaging around sort of plant-based diets and such like. But just before that, Tushar, I'd just like to ask you about, in terms of misinformation. I mean, you're there, as you said, it's your day job or night job, I believe, at the moment, because you're on night shift, is frontline work with quite a lot of COVID-19 cases. I mean, there's a lot of misinformation out there, and obviously it's something that we haven't really experienced before, so it's not surprising there's inconsistencies in a whole range of areas. What's, just in a very brief word, I mean, I know there's a lot of people out there who sort of basically almost to the point of doubt the existence of this whole thing. They think perhaps some of the figures have been manipulated, that the figures aren't real, that there's all sorts of causes, there's this, that, the other. But you're actually at the front line, really, isn't it? You're seeing, I suppose.
I mean, we on a regular, on a regular basis, we do see people with who are infected with COVID or at risk of infection, and there's a spectrum of disease that you see with that. Some people get very mild forms of disease, people who are asymptomatic but may spread the disease, spread the virus around, and then we get a certain percentage who are more severely infected. So there are people who are, pretty severely infected, and some who can maybe be managed at home, some who probably need to come to the hospital and get supplemental oxygen and maybe some other treatments. And then those who are the worst affected, who end up in the ICU and also sometimes not surviving. Even in our hospital, sadly, one of the cleaning staff acquired COVID-19 and passed away and died from it as well. So it's a very real disease. I'm not an expert on the global statistics and global numbers, but we have pretty good data collection over here. I also work at a COVID testing center, so I see how many patients I test and how many people come up positive. And when we look at the provincial numbers here, they correlate with what we see in the real world while we're working on the front line. So I don't doubt that this thing exists, and that the overall statistics that we're getting are real. I think there are sometimes undercounting. For example, if you go to a place like India, they're not going to have as much testing available. And sometimes people are in a village or in a slum and they die. And we don't track the fact that, was it COVID or not COVID? Did they get tested? So there may be undercounting in places, but I don't think there's any overcounting. The tests that we have, they tell the truth, right? But one thing, what I like to talk about this is that, see, the conversations and dialogues around COVID-19 are very much, okay, how do we respond? What do we do? How is it affecting us? How can we get a vaccine and all these things? But we don't talk as much about the cause. We talk about the results of COVID and what we should do, but we don't talk about the cause of this whole thing in the first place. And the evidence points not to some conspiracy that, the Chinese government created such a virus or something, although no doubt different countries are working on biological warfare. This one points to the evidence that we have points to the evolution of this virus in these live animal markets in China, specifically Wuhan. And that's where all the evidence points to right now. This is where the original SARS in 2002 came from as well, okay? And this is very, very important. People sort of overlook it. They think it's some kind of fluke that happened in some rare circumstance that is not meaningful to our lives, because we don't have so many wet markets in Western countries. They're predominantly in the East. We do have some here. And we think it's just some fluke. Okay, it happened from there, no big deal. But actually, it is a big deal, because what it means is that this disease most likely comes from animal agriculture. And it's not an accident. It's not an accident. Viruses and other diseases will be generated from animal agriculture. What happens is, how does this happen? I think that's some of the basic things people got to know. Number one, animals in nature are much fewer and smaller in number than the animals that we have in our factory farms, wet markets, and around the world. Okay, and our animal agriculture has more animals, far more animals than those in nature. Nature, we've annihilated most of the animals. Actually, we've decreased the wild population of animals to 1/5 of what the original populations were, let's say 50,000 years ago. We're actually right now reducing the population of wild animals very quickly, because as human expansion and activities over the globe are just taking over everything and killing off the remaining wildlife. Okay, this is a very real and acute problem. But at the same time, our livestock populations have exploded. The animals under human containment control for our consumption is exploded and exploding even bigger. When we bring such huge number of animals together in high population and high density, they pass viruses around to each other. In nature, animal populations are just generally smaller, and a virus does not want to become dangerous, because any dangerous forms of the virus may kill off the few animals that host the virus or bacteria, whatever, and then that virus or bacteria will itself die off, generally speaking. Whereas in animal agriculture, you have these massive number of animals together. So instead of the stable viruses surviving, the more virulent and pathogenic viruses or other pathogens spread more. And you get more and more mutations, because you have all these hosts passing around from individual to individual, between different species, on different farms, etc. You get more and more mutations, and some of them, the more dangerous mutations, become infective to humans as well. It's just probabilities as you generate so many, millions of different kinds of varieties and genetic recombinations. So then you get pandemics that will come from animal agriculture, because that's our biggest biogenerator of different pathogens. And as we continue animal agriculture on such wide scale, we can predict that every 5, 10, 20 years, whatever it may be, that we'll get new pandemics coming to us from animal agriculture, and that this is very dangerous. COVID-19 is a tragic pandemic because there's so many people who suffered because of their health. People have died. We've lost loved ones. I know people in our extended community who've died from it, but also the economic losses, etc. But imagine if you had a virus that was 10 times worse. It's easy that you could have a virus that spreads 5 times as fast, and has double the mortality, or has double the more, or has spreads twice as fast and has 5 times the mortality. You can even have something that has 5 times the mortality and spreads 5 times as fast. It could affect 25, 10, 20, 5, 10, 25 times the number of people, could die from it as from COVID-19. You can get viruses like this. So future pandemics could be much more devastating than this current pandemic. And that's the lesson that we should be learning. Imagine a virus that was 10 times as bad and affected children more than it did the elderly. Of course, we don't like to lose our elderly loved ones, but we are even more sensitive about children, right? These things can happen. And animal agriculture poses a threat because it is the biggest biogenerator of viruses and other bacteria too, antibiotic resistance, etc. When we breed animals, we breed viruses and other pathogens, okay? So breeding animals means you're breeding all these other things at the same time. And some of those things are periodically gonna come back and affect us in a way that we don't want, right? And I think that's the main thing, so we can have future coronaviruses, different types of influenza, which can spread more rapidly depending on the genetics of the virus. We could have resurgence we could have a new variety of smallpox that could come up again. There are other viruses like African swine fever and others that affect pigs and animals that have not yet affected humans, but eventually there could be a mutation that comes back and affects us. Historical viruses that are still with us, like measles, and more recently HIV. HIV is something that has come to us from animal agriculture. So it's worth mentioning the major forms of animal agriculture. One, as we know, is factory farming. That's one big form of mass animal agriculture, which is a threat for future pandemics because we have so many animals in high density, high populations that are coming together, and we're breeding viruses. The other form of animal agriculture are wet markets, where you have these, and the bushmeat trade. They're kind of this wildlife or semi-wildlife trade. So in Africa, they call it a bushmeat trade, where people are actually hunting, millions and millions of animals from the wild, bringing them together, transporting them, butchering them, people getting injuries from these animals, and we getting Ebola and HIV comes from the African bushmeat trade. From wild animal and semi-wild animal wet markets in China, we've had SARS 2002 and COVID-19 and potentially other diseases that are brewing and can potentially affect us. So it's mass animal agriculture that really is the effect. When people are, let's say, in tiny populations and in let's say Aboriginal populations living in the jungle somewhere, the risk is pretty low, right? But it's the mass animal agriculture that poses the biggest and real threat for current and future pandemics. And I think those are the take-home points. We spend so much talking about what we're doing about this virus. We should be thinking about where this virus comes from and where the next pandemic is going to come from. And this is, I used to think that there were 3 big reasons for stopping animal agriculture and going vegan. That is, there's ethical reasons, there are health reasons, there's environmental reasons, but pandemic becomes the 4th major reason that we should forego drastically this mass animal agriculture.
Indeed. So scary times, really. It's almost as if we don't seem to learn our lessons, and,
yeah. People want to think of technological solutions. They think that we're going to have increased biosecurity. So, hey, we're going to protect these animals from infecting us or from them sharing viruses with other populations of animals. But it's very difficult to do. It just keeps happening, right? The amount of biosecurity may help a little bit, but there's already so many viruses brewing in different animal populations that you can't get rid of, and they're going to come back and affect us. It's a bigger topic than that. The resource I want to provide and recommend to people are check out Dr. Michael Greger's book, How to Survive a Pandemic. Okay. What he says is the best way to survive a pandemic is not to have one in the first place. Okay. And he has great videos on nutritionfacts.org. And then I have a podcast where I went through a lot of these things in great detail, and all the references as well. And that can be found on plant-based data. So I think you'll enjoy it. It's about a 1 hour talk. We go into a lot more details and have all the references there too. So
just on that note, for the references, if if people want to get the references to some of the information you said, particularly perhaps say things like the origins, these viruses. I know you mentioned the origins of Ebola and HIV and things like this. I mean, where can people go? You mentioned a book here, Dr. Michael Greger, How to Survive a Pandemic. And I think also the plant-based data.org website has this information. Is it?
Yes. Dr. Greger's resources, his book is fantastic, as well as his videos that are free online, and they're very well referenced. And on plant-based data, there's a section on zoonotic disease, and you'll see then different folders with articles regarding diseases like HIV, Ebola, measles, smallpox, and COVID, of course, and so many more. So check it out there. We're always adding to that database, and you can find the original articles that are published by academics on these issues that go back before these pandemics. People have been talking about these problems happening far before COVID-19. We've known for a while that this is a risk, and that when COVID-19 came around, it's not a surprise. It's a surprise to a lot of people, but to the scientific community who studies this subject, bless you, to the scientific community who studies this subject, it is not a surprise.
Well, to give some credit to, I know that Julie Galatly and the Viva team have been doing a lot of work during the last 6 months on bringing this, research and evidence-based sort of pandemic. And it's a tricky one to talk about. That it's a bit of a minefield. There's cultural aspects, traditional aspects, and I think the overall message is that if we went vegan, we would avoid a lot of these issues. And I know it sounds
drastically reduce the risk. If
the answer, but it would make a huge difference. I know that.
Huge difference. Yeah, it would.
But yeah, I know, and I think Viva are just starting a big campaign. Actually, I think they've literally just announced the last day or two in the UK. They've got, I think, 80 billboards and really focusing on the source.
Wow.
Why are we not talking about the source of this pandemic?
Viva has a lot of great resources. I'm not familiar with all of them, but for example, they produced a white paper and a resource list regarding the safety of soy. Of course, that's one of the big myths. People think that soy is not safe. And they put together a fantastic list of all the evidence regarding soy and health, the benefits, and as well as the lack of any negative impact of soy on health as well. So it's a great organization. It's very knowledgeable. They put together the research really well. And I'm sure I'm going to look into their resources regarding pandemics. And it's great, fantastic that they're doing the billboards and educating people as well.
All right. Well, Tushar, thanks for that. We going to. I don't know whether you want to actually go into having a look at, because one of the things about I suppose it follows about the pandemic is that you mentioned that we should be looking at the sources and how to prevent future pandemics. I think the other sort of overriding feeling is that people are lacking in guidance from government bodies, professional health bodies about the benefits of plant-based diets, and some of the things you can do, some of the basic benefits that can help. I don't know about prevent. I'm not sure about that, but certainly help treat or help. There's some big breakthroughs. I'm not sure if
are you referring to, is there information that plant-based diet can help you deal with an infection like COVID-19?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that there is a tremendous, I mean, you can see my talk as well as somebody. I have a good talk on the Plant-Based Data website. There are tremendous health benefits from a whole food plant-based diet, okay? And maybe we can get into this now because this is one of our topics of discussion around health. When you look at the research about plant-based diet, there's a good North American body of studies. There are studies done in the UK and Europe. And then there are some Eastern studies where there's studies done in places like China and some other countries as well. One of the things that we notice is that in the UK and in Europe, there's less of a culture of, let's say, taking supplements. There's less of a culture around healthy eating and more of a culture of like, oh, I'll just eat whatever I want to eat and I'll be vegan or whatever it is, right? Generally, that's not a black and white thing, but I've seen some, for example, of the products that you have. You have these vegan sausages in the UK, and I read the ingredients, and they are, pretty much, almost toxic. They taste really good, okay, but they are not good for you. Now, you compare a similar product like the tofurkey product, is just one of the ones that I refer to in North America, and it has far less sodium, far less fat, and a higher proportion of plant-based proteins. So to get, like, say, your 10 grams of protein from this, veggie sausage, you're getting double or maybe triple the amount of sodium and double or triple the amount of fat, including bad sources of fat, like a lot of saturated fats, whether it's palm oil or coconut oil in that product, versus another product that has much lower sodium. It may be still a little on the high side, but far lower, and a higher proportion of the things you want, like some protein and other things that could be in there too. And so we want to really be critical about the products that we eat. And I'm not promoting veggie sausages per se. Of course, that is a treat once in a while, convenient once in a while. Cool, that's great. I love that, right? I have some too. But we want to really promote the whole food plant-based diet. That's what we really want to promote. So whole grains, your brown rice, whether it's quinoa, try to get eco sources as much as possible. Whole grains of all sorts. There's so many different grains out there. And your beans and your lentils, really every day we should be having those things. Soy foods are super safe, super amazing. So soy milk and tofu, those are minimally processed soy. And then there's like tempeh, which is a whole food, edamame, but also all the other beans and lentils that are out there, right? It's not just about soy. And we should be eating those, and plus our fruits and our veggies, preferably as much in season as possible. And that's where we're really going to get our solid benefits from. And for people who say that, I'm vegan for the animals, so I can eat whatever crap I want to, I think they're doing a disservice to themselves. Be careful about that. Your life is valuable. You are important to this world community. So we want you to take care of your health. We want you to be healthy. And one of the biggest messages that we send to other people are not our words. It's the impression that we make on them. This is we're not just battling people with facts here. We're actually battling people's psychology, right? And it's through that impression that we make. And when they see us eating healthy as plant-based, as vegan folks, and getting the benefits of those health, and they look at you and they say, you look great. The words you say have a different impression on people. The words we say and how we say them and where they're coming from so if we are vegan for the animals, trying to be healthy promotes our message. And when then people in the UK do studies on vegans and vegetarians, they're doing studies on people who are eating a whole food plant-based diet. So then the medical studies can show the benefits of what not a crappy vegan diet can do. And the data shows that, wow, a whole food, healthy plant-based diet has a great impact. So it's not just the technical data about health that we need to look at here. It's also our understanding, our philosophy, and our commitment to healthy living is, at the end of the day, also connected to helping animals and helping the environment as well. These things are very connected, and we shouldn't try to disconnect them and say, and say, I can just eat whatever junk food I want, but I'm going to advocate for a plant-based diet. Thank you for doing that. I'm not denigrating that at all. I'm just saying that we can have a much greater impact, and that's what we want to do, right? And remember to take B12, okay? We live in developed countries. B12 is a problem, and there's a lot of people out there who are kind of anti-science, right? Donald Trump is an anti-science person. He doesn't want to listen to science. There's so many other examples besides, Donald Trump. He's the go-to person to look for, some badness these days. But we all do it. Even in the plant-based movement, people are anti-science. And a lot of people will say, "Oh, you know what? I'll just eat whatever plant-based diet I want to, and and B12 will somehow naturally come to me." That is not true. Okay, when we do studies on, vegan, vegetarian, plant-based eaters in Europe, we find lower levels of B12 than those in North America. So people are not paying attention. So it doesn't mean you have to go crazy and take tons of B12 all the time. It just means that you want to take a rational level of amount of B12, maybe 1,000 or 2,000 micrograms once a week. Some people will need slightly more. Some people will need slightly less. And because we're lucky to be in developed countries, get a blood test. It doesn't have to be every year. Maybe once a year you do it for a couple of years. And if you're in a nice place, then you can maintain what you're doing and just test every 2-3 years. If you're low, start supplementing, test again in 3 to 6 months and see where we're at. Okay, so let's not get super high levels, but let's make sure that we have some mid-range levels in the normal range, and that's a rational thing we can do, and that will probably make sure that we don't lose some of the benefits of the whole food plant-based diet that we're supposed to get. Because if your B12 is low, you may compromise some of those benefits. And for pregnant women, for children, and for the elderly, be extra careful. This is super important, okay? And that's the one message that I want to give about health. I'm not going to go through a bunch of technical stuff. We don't have lots and lots of time here. But I think our approach to healthy diets is something worth talking about here. And getting rid of our own dogma,
because a lot of us promote a whole food plant-based diet. Indeed, some of us have been lucky enough to be doing this for a number of years. But I have to hold my hands up. I'm one of these people who's always believed that, really that, the plant-based diet, whole food plant-based diet is enough, and that I don't need supplements, and that supplements is, if you like, not necessarily anti-science, but more sort of feeling like, it's almost like giving in and sort of admitting that your whole food plant-based diet isn't enough. But
right.
I've certainly made the mistake of not regularly supplementing B12. And when I had a blood test with some health problems 3 months ago, I came out as really low. Really low. I don't mind, so I use a spray these days. I've got a spray, it goes inside the cheeks.
Okay.
I use a daily spray. And the other thing, D3 is in there too, which I think is another one that I probably haven't supplemented on. And the EPA and DHA is another one. I've done a lot of omega-3s, but it's the conversion rate into the EPA and DHA that you can't always measure. So unless you do your blood tests and you look for your levels.
So you brought up some really good points here. My take on this issue after reading many academic articles is, let's start with B12. Okay, now there's a lot of unknowns still about B12. Okay, I don't want to say that I'm a super expert on this topic. I've read lots of articles, but I still think I have a long way to go to learn more about it. But number one, we do believe evidence points to the conclusion that this is an important vitamin. We shouldn't neglect it, okay? There is definite evidence that people who are plant-based get less. Now, I want to ease people's minds about taking supplements. People who eat meat, most animals these days on Earth, there are far more animals in our farms than there are in nature, okay? The biomass of animals, the wild mammals, is less than 1/20th of the combined biomass of humans and our livestock, okay? It's staggering, okay, how much we've annihilated everything else and how much we have grown in comparison, okay? When these animals are raised, mostly in confined animal agriculture, the vast majority of them, they're not getting B12 from nature. B12 grows in bacteria animals who are eating and drinking water from ponds and eating from stuff that grows on the ground, they get B12 and it works its way up the food chain. These animals in factory farms do not get B12 from their feed, generally speaking. They are given supplements. They take B12 powder, they put it in the feed, and then if people are eating those animals, all they're really doing is eating a supplement anyways. If you're eating dairy and eggs, you're just eating supplements because those animals are given supplements, and then you're getting that supplement, okay? It's the way they put iodine in milk in the UK, okay? The cow didn't have the iodine. It was added to the milk, and this is just B12 added to the animal's feed. So if you stop eating animal products, you're not getting the supplements that were given to the animals. So take your own supplement. It's better to take your own supplement than to eat an animal. Fine, great, but take your B12, all right? And check it once in a while. And don't, people who are eating animals are only eating supplements anyways. When humans were living in the jungle, once upon a time, when we were, back whatever thousands of years ago, when we were kind of, a primate living in the jungle and eating mostly fruit at that time, we probably lived in places where we would get fecal matter contamination on our food, our hands from other monkeys or whatever. We would get B12 from drinking water from different sources that were also had different bacteria in them, and from fruit that had fallen on the soil, right? We got B12 from those sources. Nowadays, we have purified, filtered water, and we're not eating feces or contaminated things. That's great. We shouldn't. We don't want that. But just, we have B12 supplements, so you do that. Okay, so I want to ease people's minds. Remember that cyanocobalamin is likely the best source. We don't have to go for the fancy, expensive methcobalamin and holocobalamin and all that kind of stuff. Stick with the stable, cheap one that is shown to be like the best source. And you can take a spray, but you can also take the pill if that's cheaper and easier, and go for it. And I'm very interested in how we can make it cheap and affordable for people in developing countries, because the evidence is that omnivores also have a lot of B12 deficiency. Even though plant-based people and vegans have more B12 deficiency, it's still very prevalent in the general population. So this is something that really affects everybody, and you don't have to feel that as a vegan, your diet is failing you. Okay, let's calm down some of our anxieties and all that thing, and just realize that, hey, it's not that big a deal in terms of a failure of plant-based diet, but it's just something we should rationally approach. Now, the other two things you mentioned are omega-3s and vitamin D3, right? I believe that the evidence for supplementing those things is a little bit mixed. Okay, I'm not 100% convinced that these things are beneficial for us or what they're beneficial for. There is some evidence of benefit. There's some evidence of not benefiting as well. But there's different ways of getting your omega-3s. You can take a lot of flax seeds and canola oil, and you have olive oil, and eat foods that are rich in plant-based omega-3s. The body may not convert all of it, but that may be okay, because the body may just take what it needs and convert what it needs, and you may be okay with that. There's no evidence to the contrary, okay, of that. However, there may be a benefit of taking the marine omega-3s as well. It's a bit unclear. I sometimes take a supplement, sometimes I don't, but I definitely eat a lot of flax seeds. I put flaxseed powder in my smoothies and things like that. So I'm big on the plant-based omega-3s, especially flax seeds, one of the biggest sources, but there's other great sources as well, and mix them up in your food. Don't focus just on one thing, have a variety. And sometimes if you want to take the marine omega-3s, the EPA, DHA, then remember to tell your friends that, listen, if you're getting them from fish or fish oil or all that stuff, it's full of toxins. So even if there's mercury, methylmercury, dioxins, furans, other heavy metals and toxins built up in those fish. The ocean is very polluted now. And, we can get the same exact thing from algae oil, and that's our toxin-free, go-to, super sustainable source. So if you want to take it, there is some evidence, though I'm not 100% clear, go for it, but take it from the algae source and promote that to your omnivore friends. Fish are being devastated by the fishing industry, and farmed fish, which is a growing industry, is also devastating for the environment. Some people think it's better because it's farmed fish. We're not hurting the ocean, but that's not true. It ports the ocean. It's horrible for the oceans as well. And this is a toxin-free source that's much more sustainable, and get it from algae. So let's do that. Vitamin D3, again, it's a bit controversial as far as I'm concerned. I know that a lot of experts recommend it, and I think the studies are a bit mixed, but that's okay. If you're especially a darker skinned person like myself, and you're living in a place where there's a long winter and you don't get much sunlight, maybe it's worth it. Maybe it's more worth it for elderly people. There are people who are institutionalized. You have a grandma, a grandpa, or whoever it might be that's in the house all the time because they're very old and they can't walk anymore. And they're wheelchair bound and maybe in a nursing home or something like that, getting very little sunlight. So maybe those people could benefit more. But it's good to keep in mind that the evidence is a little bit mixed. But I'm not saying we shouldn't do it, but we don't obsess over it. Let's put it that way.
That's really interesting, especially the omega-3s, because I've been a hemp fan. You can see we've got hemp behind us. I've been guzzling hemp seeds for 30 years now.
Right, I love that.
Quite a lot. Hemp is rich in omega-3s. Yeah. There's lots of essential fatty acids in there, but I've got to say the last 2 months I've been doing these EPA DHA supplements. And they've definitely made a noticeable difference. I would definitely notice a difference. The combination of supplementing B12 and EPA DHA after 40 years on a plant-based diet. So these are the times when if you do have deficiencies, they will be beginning to impact on your health noticeably. So if you are EPA DHA, if your levels are low with your B12, I think the important thing is that this is on top of a whole food plant-based diet. These are not replacements for, the critical thing is to get your whole food plant-based diet in. But then I think, especially for, long-term plant-based, it's important to, I would say, get your levels tested. And if necessary, don't be shy to supplement, especially the EPA DHA and the B12.
Well, I think B12 is our real tier one. Yeah. That's our real priority, is the B12. Yeah. I believe that EPA, DHA, and vitamin D3, which you can also get vitamin, plant-based or maybe fungal-based, mushroom-based vitamin D3. Those are second-tier supplements. The one go-to thing is our B12. That is the one that is the most important thing. If you've got to supplement one thing, let's do that.
What sort of B12? So with it, cyanocobalamin or methocobalamin, or the other one, the fancy one, I can't remember the name.
Holocobalamin.
Cyanocobalamin. Cyano to methyl to be able to use it. Is that not? Have I got that wrong?
I have to go back and look at the different charts and pathways, because B12 does a lot of complicated stuff. It's the most complicated vitamin. Okay, so I would have to go. Honestly, I would have to go look at the charts and look at my notes on all these things. But the main thing is, cyanocobalamin is the most shelf stable. It does the job. There's good evidence for it. So I would say stick with cyanocobalamin, and it's also the most.
The gut. What I've also noticed and read up about is the gut. That sometimes there can be problems in the body metabolizing B12, because when it goes into the gut doesn't absorb it, or the gut bacteria.
Right.
So that's part of the science behind either having a blood injection or the spray.
I'm glad you mentioned the injection as well. And this absorption issue. So people have some differential absorptions and processing of B12. There's a lot of variability and a lot of unknown factors. Some people may even carry more B12 converting bacteria in their colon, in their intestine, large intestine, than other people. And some people may be absorbing it just from their own, intestines. But it's unclear. It's not reliable. It differs from person to person. So that's why we don't want to rely on something variable. We just want to say, hey, everybody supplement, get a test once in a while, and then according to your test results, if you're doing okay or if you need to take more. Now, the vast majority of people do not need to take injections. I want to say that, because I don't want people to believe that if you're vegan or plant-based, you need an injection, some kind of artificial thing. even people with pernicious anemia, a very severe form of B12 absorption deficiency, even those people taking oral supplements can be just fine. And the best way to take the oral supplement is you take that little tablet and you chew it. And if you chew it for, just chew on it and sort of keep it in your mouth for like a minute or two, or suck on it or something like that, the B12 can absorb through the mucosa, the sort of inner lining of your mouth, okay? The sun is changing directions here, so you'll see some sun on my face. But that is a great way of doing it, and you get a bit better absorption. And if you take that B12 tablet, let's say you're taking 1,000 a week or 2,000 a week, but instead took smaller doses every day, you actually get more absorption from a smaller dose percentage-wise. So some people, like for example, you have the Veg 1 supplement in the UK. We don't get that here in North America. You guys have that in the UK. It's pretty good, actually, because in the UK, see, in Canada, we get iodized salt. Iodine is put in salt. So consuming a bit of salt gives you your iodine. We do have to be a bit careful here because a lot of us are also reducing our salt intake, but still, that's the basic way we get iodine here. In the UK, mostly it's not the salt that's iodized, it's milk. So then make sure you're taking the Veg 1 supplement, which has iodine and B12 and all that stuff in it. That's one thing you could do. You could also buy iodized salt, specifically find that and get iodized salt, or find other ways of getting iodine. Seaweed, I don't believe, is a reliable way of getting it because some seaweed, it has massive amounts of iodine, maybe too much, and then other seaweed may not have as much. It's hard to measure, right? So make sure you have a reliable baseline source, and then work out the rest. Go ahead and eat seaweed for, but we just can't track the iodine so well from that. So just have a reliable source. So that's another supplement, one way or the other, that you got to make sure you're getting from iodine supplemented soy milk, or iodized salt, or a Veg 1 vitamin. So that's the other thing you should pay attention to there. I think we covered, so B12, we're pretty good. Iodine, I'm glad we mentioned it. Injections, no. Oral supplements, better for the B12 and getting tested. Yeah. Omega-3s, as we mentioned, algal sources are available, but eat lots of flax seeds and hemp seeds and all those awesome things with the plant-based omega-3s in there, and that's great stuff for your health no matter what, right? And the vitamin D3, get out there and get some sunshine. Enjoy the outdoors, and that's very, very important. Access to nature and all that stuff. Do that thing, but consider some supplements as well. It's not clear, but it's a bit of an optional thing to do. But I'm sorry, I'm not giving you a black and white answer on that. Personally, I take some D3 once in a while, but I'm not so.
It's a great conversation. I think part of the issue here is that we need to have these conversations. We need to have this conversation. There's nothing, like you said, there's nothing wrong with acknowledging where there's some options to optimize. And let's be honest, it's only really now recently that we can talk about optimizing our health, because we've got the science there, we've got access to all the different nutrients. I mean, you weren't going to get algae oil in a hurry 100 years ago unless you were processing your own something, I would imagine. So
and when we talk about this brings up another good point, actually.
But I think it's really important that people, especially now, plant base is so well established that we do pay attention, because we've got a lot of long-term people now. We've got people who've been doing this 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 years. And I do think that the generations to come, as you mentioned right at the beginning of this conversation, is that it's really important that we're getting tested, as it were, that we represent, whole food plant-based is going to give us a lot better data than eating those processed vegan sausages you're referring to. So, Tushar, look, we've only got 10 minutes left. We've been chatting away. I really do appreciate, though, your input on the supplements, and it's a conversation I think we'll be having again. We did touch on it with the plant-based health professionals early today. Some of the seaweed and kelp came up, and over-supplementation too. But just briefly, I know there's a subject very close to your heart, so I'm just going to move on from first of all, the pandemic we discussed, and then some of the nutrition, and just talk about regenerative grazing for the next 5 minutes or so. So
sure, yeah.
You have to be quick. We haven't left you much time.
We got to be quick.
I know you've been working a long shift too. So
I'm going to say one really quick wrap-up point about supplementation and testing. People are obsessed with this idea of being natural. Now, we should note that whether you're eating broccoli or kale or all these plant-based amazing foods, none of them are quote unquote natural. They're all bred by humans over generations and hundreds and thousands of years. Okay. And so they are kind of more natural, but they're also something that has been bred and created by humans, just like most of the domesticated animals we have. So we have to balance this idea of being natural. We want to, on the one hand, eat more plant-based, eat more whole foods. And yes, to some extent, that is more natural. That's great, okay? But remember that back in the Stone Age or Paleolithic days, people, a human being weighed on average 50 kilograms and might have lived 30, 40 years if they were lucky, okay? Right now, we're trying to live 80, 90, and 100 years and then play tennis and go dancing and play with our kids when we're 95. That's our goal, and have a good mind. This is not natural. We're trying to do something that is much more than was ever, quote unquote, natural in the past. So getting a blood test once in a while, it doesn't mean that you have to get blood tests obsessively if you're plant-based. Everybody gets a blood test, check their cholesterol or whatever it is at a certain age. Once in a while, we do those things, okay? So it's not some failure of plant-based diet. Remember, we're sort of doing something that's a novel thing, doing something that's on the one hand, somewhat natural, and on the other hand, somewhat trying to have extra advantages too, okay? And I think, keeping that balanced perspective doesn't make us obsessive about getting blood tests or obsessively against getting a blood test or taking a supplement as well, okay? We want to be balanced, rational, and scientific about it, keeping that perspective in mind. Now, going to regenerative grazing. The reason this is a subject that is near and dear to my heart is because, one, I've been studying the impact of animal agriculture on the environment for a long time, and my talk is there from the UK Veg Fest, recorded actually on plant-based data. Okay, so that's the one that I recorded 2019. Sorry, it's 2019, 2018, 2019. That's the talk I recorded 2019 at UK Veg Fest. Okay, that's there on plant-based data website, and a whole huge set of references. Recently, actually, for a long time, a lot of people talk about this grass-fed beef or idea as being some kind of holistic and natural. Again, there's that thing, natural solution. So you can have your beef, but just get it from grass-fed beef and so forth. And they paint this natural picture and promote that kind of meat eating, okay? But scientifically, it turns out that this is actually worse for the environment than even factory farmed cattle meat, meat that comes from cows or buffalo or whatever. It's even worse because these animals take so much more resources, so much more land, and create more methane, and so have a greater climate impact, land impact, and ultimately an impact on biodiversity. This has been known for a while. This myth has been going on for a while, and we've known for a long time that this is worse. Over the years, we have even more data showing that this is worse. But over the past year or so, you have these movies coming out like Kiss the Ground and their book and their all the other things that they're doing. And you have this other book and movement of Sacred Cow, and all these people promoting grass-fed animals through so-called holistic grazing or regenerative grazing and other terminologies that are also used. They even have called carbon negative beef, and they say all kinds of things. And they promote books and all these things. Now, these things are completely misleading. If you've ever heard of ethical oil, there's a big ethical oil movement that happened in Canada and other parts, and they were promoting Canadian oil as being ethical, or clean coal, or other things like that. Butter is back, or a lot of misinformation that get as much cholesterol as you want. It's not a problem. Cholesterol is okay. There's this whole misleading information coming even from doctors about these subjects of cholesterol and saturated fat. Okay, this is the latest big spin that is kind of a falsification about the science regarding animal agriculture. There are a number of reasons that this is not true, okay? Animal agriculture, when you're grazing animals, it takes an immense amount of land. In perspective, animal agriculture takes, between 35 to maybe even slightly above 40% of the Earth's habitable surface. Animal agriculture takes that much of our land. Probably, let's go with the number 38%. That's the latest figure from UN sources. 38% of the Earth's surface is used for animal agriculture compared to 12%, 11, 12% for plant-based agriculture for direct human consumption. If you look at that 12% for human consumption of plant-based foods, only a small portion of that is grains and pulses and nuts and seeds that are the protein component, because we also spend a lot of land on fruits and vegetables, right? So the protein component of human, the Earth's surface dedicated to directly feeding humans from plants is very small compared to animal agriculture. Yet plant-based agriculture provides more than 60% of the world's protein versus animal agriculture providing under 40% of the world's protein. So that's vastly inefficient. Amongst that 40% or less than 40% of animal agriculture, grazing takes up more than 20% of the Earth's surface, but provides less than 2% of the world's protein. It is the most inefficient form of providing nutrition to humans, the most inefficient. Of course, some people in rural areas in developing countries depend on this, but those are small populations compared to the mass of the Earth's population. If you want to, so grazing basically, takes up, per unit of meat, it takes up a very large proportion of land. And that's why even if you make it a little bit more efficient or try to switch over to grazing, you wouldn't have enough earth. You just have to cut down all of the remaining forests on Earth, and you would only increase the world's protein content by, a few small percentage points, okay? Because it's so inefficient. Now, they're trying to promote this regenerative grazing as storing some carbon in the soil. But when you look at the research and the scientific literature they quote, what the research says, okay, if you want to promote better soil through grazing, then what you should do is decrease the density of animals compared to conventional grazing. So what most of the studies do, they're not comparing it to plant-based agriculture. They're only comparing it to regular grazing. Regular grazing practices are variable. Some of the worst grazing practices causing a lot of desertification and the worst forms of environmental degradation. So yes, to improve upon that, you can store some more carbon in the soil, but not necessarily compared to plant-based agriculture, because plant-based agriculture would take a smaller area of land to grow the same amount of protein, and then we can allow the land that we're no longer using to just become forest again, to become wetland again, to become natural grasslands again. And there's no evidence that grazing animals on land, even if you optimize it, could ever be better than renaturalizing land. So the real option is switch to plant-based protein, use a much smaller amount of land than you would use for animal agriculture, and the land that you no longer use, allow it to become wild again. And of course, we need that for biodiversity. It also becomes a carbon sink, and there's other environmental benefits as well, okay? So grazing is inefficient. Rather than grazing, plant-based protein uses less land. You can rewild the land that has now been spared from humans. This can also increase food security, because we're going to have 10 billion people on the earth. A lot has to be done to grow enough food. So if we switch to more plant-based agriculture, again, you can grow the food on a smaller area of land and feed more people at the same time globally. Now, in every specific little area of the earth, it may not be exactly true, but in the vast majority of the places where we practice animal agriculture, this is probably true, okay? And there's other falsifications that these people do when they're promoting regenerative grazing. So the research on regenerative grazing, when they write a paper about this, they quote certain other articles. So you look at their sources, and the sources say, use less animals, don't overgraze. They say grow cover crops and only bring the animals back to the original area once a year. Okay, well, you can grow cover crops or have plant-based agriculture that grows legumes and whatnot that store more carbon in the ground, and even plant-based agriculture could be as good as storing more carbon in the soil as this so-called regenerative grazing. There's good evidence for that. So optimized plant-based agriculture. These regenerative grazing proponents say, oh, the plant-based alternative is monocropping. They paint this picture of like these beautiful sort of meadows where you have a few cows grazing to monoculture agriculture. Well, of course, that's not the way you have to practice plant-based agriculture. You can do much more mixed use and permaculture type methods, veganic agriculture. Those could be a lot better options, and low-till and no-till plant-based agriculture. So there's lots of good plant-based agriculture that we can improve our current techniques. We can use these better ways of farming plants as well. Okay, I think those are some of the things that we want to just mention about regenerative grazing. On plant-based data, my partner in the project, Nicholas Carter, has some really good podcasts about the myth of regenerative grazing with a lot of the references attached. And eventually we're going to produce some infographics and a reference bank specifically on this subject. The reason it's so important right now is pretty much every year, the animal agriculture industry or the oil industry or whatever it is comes up with their marketing schemes. And right now, they're heavily marketing this idea of carbon negative beef and holistic grazing, regenerative grazing, whatever you want to call it. Okay, that's their heavy push. And it's fooling a lot of people. It's fooling a lot of people who are originally vegan into thinking that you can use these cattle to even completely reverse climate change. And don't worry about all the cars that we're driving because we'll just indefinitely store carbon into the ground. That is not true. You can restore carbon into the ground because carbon becomes, natural areas are sort of saturated with soil carbon. And as we degrade them, they get less carbon. But then if we use better practices of better grazing or better plant-based agriculture, or especially rewilding, the soil will become resaturated with carbon, but you can't go beyond a certain point. It's not like you can forever store carbon in the ground. You can store incremental amounts of carbon, and then every year that you store some carbon, the subsequent year you're going to store a little bit less. Okay, so they're painting this picture as if you can just continue doing this practice and continuing to store as much carbon into the ground as you possibly want and solve the climate crisis. And that's a very bogus, misleading, and even dangerous idea that takes people away from the priority of reducing fossil fuels and eating more plant-based foods. Okay, so I think maybe that's all the time we have to get into that, but I think it's worth knowing. And check on plant-based data. You'll see some good podcasts that will be attached to reference lists. And over the next month or two, we're going to have even better resources regarding the scientific data that we should be looking at to understand properly the situation.
Brilliant, Tushar. It's great. We've got the data there. It's really important for people to be able to access that data because, you mentioned the marketing there. And I mean, the arguments do get more and more complex, and it's important to keep coming back to the basics, the data, the facts, and be able to refer to them. So I think people can see here, look, you've got the plantbaseddata.org. That's the source of data. And indeed, you're right, we're a little bit out of time now. I think we've been going on for a good while. We've got some good comments in there. There are one or two questions which you might want to perhaps attend to. They're on Facebook. We won't talk about them now. But there's possibly, if you go onto Facebook there, a couple of comments, there's questions there.
Okay, yeah. Send me the link and I'll do my best to answer some of those questions.
So thanks, Tushar. Thanks for joining us. That's a really interesting, particularly all the health aspects. And, the work you're doing is just, I think it's amazing. You've got so much energy, considering you're doing frontline shifts in an A&E. in a city in Canada. I think it's just tremendous. You've got so much good energy for this really important work, and that you're giving this freely available to people. So well done. Thank you for that.
Thank you for all you're doing, and it's all about teamwork. So it's that's the whole.
It's a joy to link up across the globe, and that's one of the benefits of not having live events, is that we can utilize fully the online options, and that's a benefit. So I'm sure we'll invite you back. I'm sure we'll come again, and I'm really grateful too. Just that little input about what you feel about COVID-19, what we need to do about it long term, but also short term. Some of the supplements knowledge, invaluable. People, you'll be able to watch this again later if you want. You can share it with your friends. Really good resources, especially I would say during Veganuary, for when people are getting new to plant-based diets. I think this will be a really excellent little hours talk. So that's it tonight. We've done our first VegFest UK online, November 14th. We're back tomorrow for the Wildlife Summit. Thank you again, Dr. Tushar Mehta from Ontario, Canada, Toronto. And thank you, everybody, for listening, and particularly all the stalwarts who've been commenting and liking and sharing today. That's really appreciated. And also a little thank you for our studio man, Pete, who's been working hard since.
Yeah. All right. Thank you for having me, Tim, and sending really good wishes to everybody there in the UK. Hopefully I'll get a chance to see you all in person when this phase of COVID is done finally.
We'll get through it. All right, thank you.
Good wishes to all. Take care. Bye-bye.